Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in Legacy. Today we're looking at Hogaak and Dredge. Hogaak and Dredge are both graveyard-based decks, and while they're not the same, there's enough overlap that I'm covering them at the same time. The biggest difference is that Hogaak is more of a combo deck, whereas Dredge is more of an aggro deck. Hogaak will be the focus of this guide, but I'll also touch on Dredge. Hogaak is a deck built around casting the titular card Hogaak Arisen Necropolis from the graveyard. Since it has both Convoke and Delve, amassing creatures and cards in the graveyard is necessary to casting it. To facilitate that, the deck plays a number of self-mill cards and discard outlets including Stitcher Supplier, Hedron Crab, Careful Study, and Putrid Imp. Once the graveyard is sufficiently stocked, a number of options avail themselves, but we'll focus first on Hogaak. For the combo, you'll need to cast Altar of Dementia and get Hogaak and Bridge from Below into the graveyard. Once you have sufficient Delve fodder and at least 2 creatures that share a color with Hogaak, you can cast Hogaak and sacrifice it to Altar, milling yourself for 8 and thus providing more Delve fuel. Any bridges from below already in the graveyard when you sacrifice Hogaak will trigger, creating zombie tokens that can be used for Convoke. Similarly, various creatures in the deck can be retrieved from the graveyard to serve the Convoke role, including Gravecrawler, Bloodghast, and Vengevine. Repeat casting and sacrificing Hogaak to Altar until you've built up a sufficient number of zombie tokens, then sacrifice them all to mill your opponent out. Alternatively, if milling the opponent isn't an option, perhaps because they have an Emrakul in their deck, you can build an enormous board of Hogaak, zombie tokens, and various other creatures, pass the turn, then attack for lethal next turn. Any cards better off in the graveyard, such as Hogaak and Bridge, can be discarded to Careful Study or Putrid Imp. Cabal Therapy clears the way of interaction and can be cast from the graveyard by sacrificing a creature, potentially triggering Bridge or Stitcher Supplier. Meanwhile, Dredge is looking to win in a different way. While it does still play Bridge from Below, it only cares about making creatures and dealing damage. Rather than Stitcher Supplier, Hedron Crab, and Altar of Dementia, it uses Dredge cards like Golgari Grave Troll, Stinkweed Imp, and Golgari Thug to fuel the graveyard. Any draw effects, especially those which discard, are used to put dredgers in the graveyard and then draw, or rather dredge. These include Faithless Looting, Careful Study, and Breakthrough. Lion's Eye Diamond can also be used to quickly dump the hand and then its mana spent on things like looting or Ox of Agonis. Lastly, Cephalid Coliseum is a land that can help facilitate dredge lines. From there, the deck mills over numerous cards, primarily trying to find Bridge from Below. Any creatures that return from the graveyard can start accruing value from Bridge, which include Narcomoeba, Icarid, Ox, and Hogaak. Any other graveyard synergistic cards are also valuable, such as Cabal Therapy, Creeping Chill, and Otherworldly Gaze. Sideboarding and how to beat it. The strategies for Hogaak and Dredge completely rely on the graveyard, and while they're difficult to interact with in Game 1, sideboard games get a lot worse for them. Hogaak and Dredge can have a difficult time beating graveyard hate, especially ongoing effects like Rest in Peace. Answers to graveyard hate are absolutely necessary. Because Bridge from Below is so important, as the opponent it's possible to disrupt it by killing your own creatures. This includes lines such as bolting your own Delver or evoking Solitude or Endurance. Notably, if you evoke Endurance, you can stack the triggers so that it dies first, exiling all bridges, and then shuffles the graveyard into the library. As the Hogaak or Dredge player, you should avoid making attacks that allow the opponent to block with and thus kill their own creatures unless you have lethal. Follow the same principle when and if you declare blockers. An especially valuable card for both decks is Leyline of the Void, since it stops opposing graveyard decks and prevents the opponent's creatures from going to the graveyard, thus protecting Bridge from Below. The usual rule of thumb about pressure applies, which is that while you may be able to shut down the deck's graveyard, if you're not applying pressure, Hogaak and Dredge can just start casting their creatures normally and eventually win via creature beats. Tips and tricks. Although you can't spend mana on Hogaak, you can still fetch Dryad Arbor and use it to pay for Convoke. You can use one Hogaak to pay the Convoke on a second Hogaak, hold priority, then sacrifice the first one to Altar, or just Legend Rule one out to trigger Bridge. If you have to, you can use Cabal Therapy on yourself to get cards like Hogaak or Dredgers into your graveyard. Even if you don't have an Altar of Dementia, Hogaak is still a huge 8/8 trampler that can win the game just by attacking. Fetch lands trigger Hedron Crab twice and bring back Bloodghast twice. Keep in mind that Vengevine triggers specifically from the second creature cast for the turn, not just casting 2 creatures. It's important to think about sequencing in regards to what can be used from the graveyard. Before milling yourself, think about whether you can hold off playing a land for Bloodghast, casting a creature for Vengevine, and so on. Creatures that die in the process of granting an ability are more valuable than normal due to them triggering Bridge from Below, such as evoke elementals like Wispmare. Cards like Narset, Part of Veils don't stop Dredge. You can sacrifice Icarid to Cabal Therapy since it'll die at end of turn anyway. I hope you've enjoyed this look at Hogaak and Dredge. I want to thank my fellow players in the Magic community for whom sharing their experiences helps make these guides possible. You can find additional resources, such as an up-to-date deck list, in the description. If you think I left out anything important or got something wrong, please leave your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned to see what deck we look at next time.